Today we're in the garden and we are going to be working on planting a year's worth of food in our small garden space. So this garden, I measured it out and it was, I think, around like 1/10 of an acre. It is not very big, so I'm going to go over different ways we're able to maximize what we grow. The first thing to consider when you want to maximize the space in your garden is to have good soil. So our soil is a mixture of our native soil and compost, and we tilled the garden this year. We've done a lot of different types of gardening, some with the cardboard, you put the stuff on top so that you're not tilling, and this year we just had to till because the weeds were so bad. We could have covered it up, but everything was uneven. Pretty much at the end of last gardening season, we just left the garden. We had a lot going on and it wasn't a priority, and so it was a bit of a disaster coming back into it this spring, and so we decided to just till it up. And there's a lot of controversy over to till or not to till, but if you're starting your own garden for the first time and you just have a bare lawn, it's not the end of the world to till it. You have other options to go with, but that's what we went with to try to loosen the soil up. Your soil can't be super compacted or things won't grow. So we tilled it once and had some troubles with that because, you know, the tiller always breaks. And then we added some old horse manure compost. And so we have horses and cows on the property, or one cow, and we take the manure from them, we set it out, some of it's like 10 years old now, and we take the old stuff and add it into the garden. So we put a few big tractorfuls in here, and then Eric tilled the garden a second time to mix all that together. We're just working with what we have, and if you're starting somewhere and it's not picture perfect, the best thing to do is whatever you need to do to get started. The next thing to think about to maximize your crop production in your small-scale garden is your layout. We've tried different layouts in our garden and we often will switch it up every year, and the reason for this is so that we can rotate our crops. So crop rotation is really important so that you're not putting the same plants in the exact same spot every year and taking all those same nutrients out of the ground. Also, another reason is to help with pest control. With your layout, you also want to consider how much empty space you have for moving in between your rows. I've done the mistake before where I plant things really close together because I want to make the most out of my space, but then I can't really fit down in the aisles to weed and water and mulch and hill our potatoes up. And that's a problem, especially once it gets later in the season and things are getting a little wild. When you first plant your garden, you always are tempted to plant them closer together because your starts are super tiny or your seeds are really small. But think about the size of the plant once it's fully grown and producing fruit, how much space you're going to need to get in there and how much it needs to grow. Another thing to think about if you have a small space is to consider going up. So I'm sitting inside of our structure that we often will grow our squash on, and behind me here you can see one of the old vines from last year, but this year we're thinking of maybe trying our tomatoes on it. Because we've done squash on it multiple years in a row, we thought we might try switching it up, so we're going to see how that goes. And so this is an alternative to the classic like cattle panel tunnel that you see in a lot of gardens. Cattle panels are really expensive, so instead we took free tree branches, made them into like a triangle, and then put what we call sheep wire, and it's like a cheaper version of cattle panels. It's more flexible, so we could bend it on, and it gives, for us, we've done cucumbers on this to grow up, something for the vines to cling onto. We've done squash on it, pumpkins on it, and I'm going to try tomatoes this year. Oh, we've done peas on it as well. With your layout, there's other ways you consider going up as well. We're going to try some different methods this year. So think about how you possibly could grow things up and not just out. And that can save you a lot of space, especially for things like squash and vining plants that really will take over a whole corner of your garden. When choosing where in your garden to plant certain crops for your layout, it's important to consider what does well in shade and what does well in full sun, and what your garden has to offer. So our garden is against a line of trees here behind me, and those trees provide shade for half the garden. So for instance, right now this half is in full sun and this half is in shade, and that will be all sun here in about an hour. So I'll plant my cooler lichen crops at the back, and things like tomatoes I want to have up in the sun all day long as much as possible. So the layout is where we're at this morning. So Eric's just finishing up the chores. He's just finishing feeding the horses, and then we're gonna start making this into rows and deciding what kind of layout we want. We'll make our rows up, and then we'll get to planting our seedlings and our seeds. We definitely always crowd them.
Oh.
So it'd be good to, we definitely need to work on that, because if we can't get in to do anything, then you're like stepping on everything. It's always too close, isn't it? They're not super straight, but that's okay.
No, it's okay. Yeah, it looks good. 6 nice rows.
I think we'll finish this one, and then we'll do ones that are closer together for the carrots.
Yeah.
Back here in our raised bed, I'm going to be planting our broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage so that we can do a row cover over top of the whole raised bed and help protect it from cabbage worms. We got those really bad last year. They actually turned out pretty good, our cabbage and our broccoli, but I had to pick the worms off all the time. So we're hoping that this will help minimize the amount of pests, and so I'm going to get these into the garden. Do you think 3 cabbage is too many, or should I just do 2?
No, do 3.
You think? They got huge last year. Like their heads got really big. I think we have plenty of room to just do 2. I also don't know, I think these little things might be the Brussels sprouts and those big things are the cabbage. So I kind of messed up on my labeling, so I'm not really sure what's what, but we'll find out when it starts to grow.
Mystery.
The soil in here is super nice.
Yeah, it is. I think because it doesn't erode as bad.
Yeah, that's what I think. It also stays wet longer. Do you know what I mean? Like,
so it doesn't become like super dry and rocky.
Yeah. Also, there's not rocks heaving up because it's stuff we put in.
Yeah.
So we just got our cabbage and broccoli all put into the raised bed, and now we're going to try to get in our tomato plants before it gets dark. It's starting to get late at the night, and so we're probably going to finish planting everything tomorrow. But the third main thing to focus on when you're trying to plant a year's worth of food in a small space is to prioritize the things that are a staple in your diet. So for us, that's potatoes. We plant a lot of potatoes because we eat them almost once a day at least. And then also tomatoes. So behind me on our trellis, Eric's getting the ground ready, and we're gonna be planting tomatoes all along there because we make our own tomato sauce, canned tomato salsa. We eat a lot of tomatoes throughout the year, and we try to grow them all ourselves. So we'll see how we do this year, how our starts come along. They're pretty laggy, even though we started them under lights. So we're gonna bury them up into the first leaves, and we're gonna get them going in here. A few things that we're not growing in the garden this year to save on space and plant the things that matter most are peppers. Even though we really like peppers, we find that our peppers just don't do well. It's not a very hot place here in Canada, and if we had a greenhouse, I think it'd be ideal, but we're going to try this year just growing them on pots on our front deck in the sun, because we don't want to waste space with failing peppers like we have many years in the past. And so our main 3 are onions, potatoes, and tomatoes, and then carrots as well. And the others are kind of like fun things we like to have as well, but those are our main storage crops we have for the year. So we're going to get to our tomatoes, and then tomorrow we'll be planting everything else. What do you think? Like 2 per section? You know what I mean? They're looking pretty good.
There's a deer.
I'm surprised. Eating Bossy's grass, eh?
Yeah.
Have to put her out back on the grass.
I gotta expand it.
So one of the crops that we plant a lot of is potatoes. This year we were able to save some of our potatoes from last year that we grew to plant. And they're looking a little long. They have these long sprouts on them. And it's important that if you save your seeds, or if you have seed and it's already started to sprout, you want to make sure you do not break these off, because this is where the plant's going to grow from. We usually just plant Yukon Golds, but we didn't have quite enough to plant for this year again. We could have used a little bit more. And so we decided to go to the store and get a few seed potatoes, and we got some chieftains, and they're a red potato on the outside and they're white on the inside. And we were going to just get Yukon Gold, but they didn't have any, and it's also a good idea to not always put all the same species in your garden in case something happened with them that year and they didn't grow very well. So we're going to switch it up and do a few of each and see how they come. And so we're going to get started planting our potatoes. How far apart do we need? Maybe like 6 inches?
I'd say.
There we go. And then we can cover them?
Yep. Hot potato.
Now that we have our potatoes in, we're going to move on to planting the back of our garden, and we're going to start with the peas. So behind me we have this little frame, and this is what we're going to put some lattice in between so the peas can grow on it. Back by the peas, we're also going to have a few bush beans, not very many. We just eat these fresh. We've tried canning them and we just don't eat them. So we're not going to allocate much space in the garden for beans, because we don't eat them that much. We like dried beans, but that takes up a lot of space to grow enough beans to dry. So for right now, we're not going to do that. We'll buy our dried beans, but eventually we'd like to get to a point where we have enough space that we can grow beans to dry them for using for making like baked beans and things. In the second row, we're going to put our lettuce and our spinach because it's shaded back here and they like the cooler temperatures, and that way they won't bolt too early on us. And then we're going to do our row of beets, and then we're going to get to putting our carrots in.
I could try making mustard beans.
What do you mean? Like,
like a pickle. Yeah.
Did I make those one year?
We tried, yeah, one year. They weren't great.
I thought they were disgusting.
Gave me the recipe. Wasn't that great.
I liked beans best if they're like boiled, like frozen beans, and I boil them as a side dish.
I like
Do you know what I mean?
beans.
Am I putting these way too close together?
Seed spacing, 2 to 3 inches. No.
Like this, maybe?
Yeah.
Well, let's put 2 in each hole.
Yeah.
Just were they
mustard? They like mustard.
mustard? So they were yellow beans.
Yellow beans
that had
but
mustard
mustard
pickles, but with beans instead of cucumbers.
Basically.
Okay. We're gonna try something new this year for carrots. We have these, and they are a carrot tape, and we've never done these before. I've never tried them, but I happened to find these, like I bought them last year I think, and I never ended up using them. And so we're gonna try those out. And then we also have other carrots. These are navel carrots, or navel carrots, and then Tuchkin carrots? I don't know. These are names that are hard to say. But they're from Vessi Seeds, which most of our seeds are from Vessi Seeds. And so we're going to plant a few of these, the carrots, next to our onions. How deep do the onions need to be?
I'll just put them up top.
Like this?
So what's next here is we're going to plant our cucumbers. And this year Maggie and I, we're going to trellis them. We've trellised them different ways in the past. We planted them just in a bed. But instead of buying an expensive cattle panel, we found this old bed frame leaning against the barn. So we're going to use that as a trellis for our cucumbers. We're planting two types. Raider cucumber, which is like a kind of like an English straight 8 style cucumber for eating. And then a gherkin cucumber, which will be for pickling. And so those are the two types we're going to try this year. Well, that might be a little deep.
Oh. The inches, I did an inch. Okay. That's that line.
All right, I guess.
Well, maybe I did a little deep. There, that's an inch. We can put one in here. I like this little tool. It's handy. Yeah, that's an inch. The last tip for growing the maximum amount of food in a small garden is to really nurture those plants once you have them in the ground. So the last thing that we did here in the garden was that we added a bunch of mulch to our rows, and for right now we just put them in the walking spaces between our rows, and as the plants come up we're going to bring that mulch up and around each plant, and that's going to really help retain moisture. The plants need water to grow, and they often can do better if the roots are a little bit cooler for some plants, and so that's what we're going to do here once we see the seedlings starting to come up. If you do it too soon, I find that it's hard to know where you had planted your seeds, and then you could possibly suppress the plants from growing, and you don't want to do that. So we're going to wait till we see them to bring that mulch around, and it makes you not have to water nearly as much. The second thing is to keep your weeds down, because weed competition can hinder some plants from growing the best of their ability since they have to compete for the nutrients from those weeds. So keeping your garden clear of weeds and nice and watered will really help them grow strong and produce lots of fruit. Another thing you can do to keep your garden growing nice and strong is to help reduce pests in your garden. So we just put a row cover on over top of our raised bed, and that is to try to keep the little moths and little cabbage worms off of our cabbage and our broccoli and Brussels sprouts. We find that those little cabbage worms were evil last year. All I did every night was pick off little worms. So I'm hoping that having this covered will really help with that this year. This cover will allow us to still water through it, which is really good. A rain can go through it. Eric's adding a board to one side to hold it nice and tight, and then we're going to set rocks just along the edge, and that way moths won't get in and our cabbage will be able to grow a lot better. It's a great feeling to have our garden in for the year, and I'm excited to see how everything comes and grows. I hope these tips have helped you if you are looking to grow lots of your food in a small space this year. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.